this particular dress has bias binding coming all the way around. Neck, bottom, the curved hem, that's all bias binding. Now, if you went out, if you took this nice soft rayon and you went out and bought prepackaged bias binding, it would add a real stiffness to that because all the prepackaged bias binding is cotton. Okay, so it would add a stiffness. So you really want to make your own. I've got some other examples here. This one also took a whole lot of bias binding because it's all along the edges, and it's, oops, well, I did some creative work on making these pockets. So there's some odd fabrics there, but all the seams covered with bias binding because this is cut, this is quilted and cut and then pieced together. So if you want the insides finished, they're all finished with the bias binding. So that was quite a bit of bias binding to make. Again, this is a similar to that. The neckline of this has a bias binding on it. And getting away from clothing, okay, most of the By Annie patterns have bias binding on them. That's the way she finishes off her edges. So lots of different things like this can have it. Lydia just took one home, the little duffel bag that we make here. The inside seams are finished off with bias binding. So that's on the outside sometimes, and just like that has bias binding to finish off the inside. Some packages do. Now this was made back when I was being very fancy, and is another example of putting on bias binding. And this time I just used, well, this is a silk organza to help keep this in shape without adding weight to it. And this is a silk organza bias binding that I made. Okay, whenever you're, like when you make a quilt, you don't need a bias binding because you have all straight edges. But whenever you're doing something that you're getting into curves, you want to have that little bit of give to it. So hence the bias binding. So I'm going to take a piece of a little rectangle that I have here. And first of all, what's the bias of the fabric? Okay, it's 45 degrees from the straight cut edge. So best thing to find the straight cut edge is the salvage of the fabric, because you can't be positive unless you squared it off that the cut edge is straight. Okay, so the first thing I did with this was I did cut off the salvage because I didn't want that in my seams, and squared it off. Now this ruler has the 45-degree line, or this mat has the 45-degree line on it. Most rulers have the 45-degree line on it. So I'm just going to square this off here and cut this. And I have a short ruler here. Okay, so now this is my bias edge. I'm going to take the piece that I cut off and I'm going to put it on this end so I have a parallelogram. Never thought you'd use your geometry, huh? I usually sew these together with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Didn't get this machine there. Let's just push the wrong button. I don't know if I turned. Okay, I am going to press that seam open because it's going to be less bulky when I make my bindings. If my fingers work this morning. All right, I am going to show you 2 ways to go from here. So first of all, then you got to decide what size you want your finished binding to be. And usually I make mine an inch. That once you get the double fold in there, it's a 1/2 of an inch. So I'm gonna cut my strips 2 inches wide. And I'm gonna continue working with a short ruler. Okay, so I've got my first line, and it's a nice idea, and I don't have a real big mat here. It's a nice idea to not move it once you cut it. Now this batik that I'm working with is pretty stable, but if you're working with a lighter weight fabric, a lawn or a rayon, if you start moving this, you're not going to get your straight edge because that bias is going to go, ooh. Okay. So sometimes I just leave it in place and then move this over. Now I can move it over to the 4-inch. But this mat is 18 inches, so you can see that I started with about a 17-inch piece of fabric. And this is a 24-inch ruler, so each of these strips are close to 24 inches long. Okay, there comes a time, especially with the size of the mat that I have, that I would need to readjust these. Okay, now before I sew these together, this little piece has just got a little bit on here. I know I'm going to have plenty of fabric, so I'm going to cut that one piece off. The pieces that are bigger, I just leave in there. So once I get them all cut, I have learned I need to keep them in order of the way that the way it's cut. So I can pick up one, put it to the other, put my right sides together. And so depending on, I'm going to overlap it based on what size seam allowance I'm there. So I just usually do about 1/4 of an inch and I sew all the strips together. Okay, so I have done that. Ta-da! Here. So you can see I have over 2 yards of bias binding, and I started with the same size piece of fabric. Okay, about a fat 1/4, a little bit less. Okay, I'm going to show you another technique that I don't have to pick each of these up and sew them together, right?
Show me how you sew that together again. So you put the right sides together and
just at this point, it's just like, and I got batik, so here it doesn't matter. just like, let me sew one. If you're a quilter, you've done this. If you're not a quilter, no, you do it the same way. Oh, because you don't have your angle cut
Exactly,
yet.
you have an angle, you have squares,
you
and then
don't-
what you do is
You kind of do the same thing,
Okay.
but mine's already cut off.
yeah, I see that. So
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good question, though. Okay. I have another piece that I prepared here, and I've drawn lines on it. Okay. I drew my 2-inch lines on it.
And why did you do that as opposed to what you did in the other one?
Okay. I will show you. I'm going to bring this end together. What?
She's making it even more complicated. I know she is. I'm like, I have to look up that parallelogram. So there we go. That shows you how much I remember that geometry. Just get the spelling correct.
This particular method looks kind of weird as you're pinning it together. But I'm putting my pins so that I'm going to sew this at 1/4 of an inch. I want that 1/4 of an inch line to roughly match the red to the red. Okay. And I'm just going to keep, sometimes I just start sewing from there. It's just, you see, it looks kind of strange. All right, I'm going to just pin that much because we're going to move on here. All right. So I pin those, assuming I'm going to do 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to keep bringing that over. Now I am actually sewing this on the straight of grain, so it should theoretically keep its shape. Okay, so now you see I made a tube, okay? At this point, I usually cut this by hand, but you can also cut it with your rotary cutter. Oop, and I went off here. And now I'm just going to cut on my line till I get this. The bigger the piece, the easier it is to cut it with the rotary cutter. But what's the difference between A and B?
This is already going to be seamed.
This is already seamed. I only have to sew one seam.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about how I match up my edges. Okay. And I've matched pretty closely there. All right. And somehow I didn't sew there, but okay, you got the idea. One continual piece. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I didn't pick up
It's
my
cool
bobbin.
here, but I'm sure I couldn't duplicate that at home.
Well, what throws you off is how odd it looks when you start pinning the one to the other, because it kind of stays a little cattywampus until you actually start
Right.
sewing it. Yeah.
You can cut it easier if you use your sewing, your ironing table and put a thinner mat.
Oh,
You can
and then
spin it
just
around.
put, good tip. Just put it over the end with a little mat. Yeah. That's why I don't know, I've always just cut it with the scissors. But anyways, I'm not going to cut the whole thing. Okay, because either way, once we have it all cut, see how good I am with the rotary cutter? Once we have it all cut, either way, pieced together, now we want to fold it. Okay, you can fold it. Let me move this over so it's on the...
Fran, before you do that, can you demonstrate on the camera how much it curves compared to a straight cut of fabric?
Oh, okay. Well, it'll be a little easier. Okay, so if I wanted to piece this, well, it's hard when it's big, but yeah, you can see how it curves. I'm not on the camera. All right, let's go. See, I can kind of go around there. All right. Once it's folded smaller, it's easier to see that. Okay, so I have an inch bias binder folder, and I'm just going to take my end. All right. Sorry, I got to see where my camera is. All right, there you go. And take my end and put it in the little groove here. Just going to use a pin to push it through. There we go. Okay. Bring the end through, and you can see it start folding there. Okay. So I'm going to pin this down to start with.
It makes like an oval thing.
Okay. Have you ever made a strap for something?
Yes,
So-
I did one yesterday. I was just about to ask you if you can use that to make a strap.
So usually directions to make a strap, they have you fold it in half, like that, and then you fold the two sides in to the center,
Got it.
okay? And then if you want to, you fold it in half again,
Right.
all right? So this is going to do those first folds for me. I don't have to find the center. It's bringing the two sides in evenly together. And I'm just gonna take my iron. I want it somewhat straight as I go in.
I can imagine doing this with rayon instead of having to sit there and fold the fuzzy rayon.
Yeah. Okay. So that's going to do my first fold for me. All right. Now, if I'm putting that in a garment, I open this up, sew that seam down, bring it around, sew the second seam down. Or same thing with the bag. All right. If it's going to the inside, you do the same thing. Okay. And if it's going to the inside, sometimes I just open that up so I have a smaller amount to the inside. This is less of a binding than just a bias cut, okay? That one you're not gonna fold. Bring that back. When you're doing something, when it's finishing the edge, then you want to be at this step here.
Those metal things come in different sizes?
Yes, they
then,
do.
and you can make
Mhm.
different widths?
Mm-hmm. So basically, you're gonna cut your binding twice the size of, if you get a 3/4 inch one, you're gonna cut your binding 1.5 inches. Okay, yep. Did you have a question?
I just to ask Kay if she had one of those tools because I'm admiring it. We use them to make just about either.
Yeah.
And that looks like it would really make life easier in so many ways. Because I burn myself when I iron.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good, I'm not the only one. First thing I did before making anything else for my dress was what she's doing. And I cut my strips and I put it through the bias maker instead of having to sit there and fold every little bit.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're going to unfold part of it, it saves you so much
It
time.
still saves you from burning your fingers.
Yeah. Okay. So that is that. Any questions? Did my sheet of paper go around? Okay, there's a few ideas. I thought next time I look at interfacings, I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between interfacings and stabilizers, but I'm going to concentrate on interfacings. And then another time, stabilizers. Okay? And then in November, we have our holiday one. So there's going to be, 6 or 7 different ideas we'll be sharing then. We'll have some snack stuff here for you. Yeah, I think I'm going to change the name of it the first of the year instead of learn a bunch at lunch, maybe tips, tricks, and techniques.
Does it
Little
mainly
more
sewing, or is it going to be a combination of everything?
explanatory. It's going to, what do you mean?
Like making clothing is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Sewing in general, not a complete focus.
Okay, as opposed to embroidery and quilting and that kind of stuff. That's what
Embroidery, no, quilting.
Okay.
Yes. The first of the year, I've already talked to Andrea about like 1 month, it will probably concentrate more on general, because a lot of what you do for clothing, you do for bags and home deck stuff, a lot of similar things. You got your bias binding, placemat, especially with rounded corners, you got your bias binding, pot holder. There's lots of home decking things that you often use a bias binding on.
If you made a quilted Christmas tree skirt, you would put bias binding around it.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's rounded. Yeah, if you think about it, there's a lot of places for bias binding.
I recently saw a jacket back on Instagram or somewhere, and they had used like the really wide bias binder, the one that makes like finished, it's like that big. And they had made multicolored strips of bias and had woven the back. And they had placed fusible, like SF 101, things that shape flex. They placed the fusible up, laid their bias woven piece on there, infused it, and then made the jacket back. It was stunning.
I have a whole jacket that I made weaving.
Wow.
You need to show it.
I
But I was just like floored. I was like,
I tried to think this morning what I had to bring that had